struggling rancher, bought a girl labeled too wild for any man, unaware she was born to ride beside him. The saloon doors banged open, and the stale air of dust and sweat thickened. Men leaned on wooden beams, tankards in hand, their laughter punctuated by the hiss of whiskey poured into cracked glasses. Through the haze of tobacco smoke and low lantern light, they saw her. A wild thing dragged into the center of the floor, a young woman, hair tangled, eyes fierce, chin lifted as if daring the world to break her. They called her Tessa. She might have been 22. Her hands were bound behind her by rough rope, but her posture remained defiantly upright. She wore a faded work dress and worn boots, and dirt caked at her wrists. Her eyes, though, were bright, full of storm and fire. Hank McCord, old and bloated, stalked onto a table and pointed a shaking finger at her. His beer gut jutted out, his face flushed red with drink and pride. "This one," he shouted, his voice cracking over the din, "knows not how to cook nor to bow her head. Her tongue cuts better than a blade. She called me out in front of my hands. Anyone want to take a crack at taming her, go ahead. I sell her cheap. She ain't worth $1 to any man who knows how to teach a woman her place." The saloon erupted with laughter. A burly blacksmith took a long pull of his ale, slammed the glass down, and roared out loud, "Wild mare, that one. Who'd dare mount her?" Tessa's chest rose and fell, but she did not flinch. She stared at Hank, and her voice rang out, steady and clear. "You're the one who can't teach anybody anything, least of all yourself." The words hit like a whip. Hank stared, fuming. He leapt from the table before anyone could stop him and delivered a savage slap. Tessa, caught off balance, hit the ground hard. Dust spun around her like taunting spirits. Blood welled at her lip. Yet she did not cry. She pressed one hand into the splintered floorboards and rose, brushing the dirt and blood from her mouth with the cuff of her sleeve. The room quieted, but not in respect. It fell silent in anticipation. In a shadowed corner stood Bo Dillon. He was tall, his shoulders broad and still, despite the makeshift cast wrapped around his right leg. A carved walking cane rested against the bench at his feet. When he rose, the room shifted. Men straightened, whiskey glasses halted halfway to their lips. He moved quietly, like a rock rolling into place, and stopped so close they felt the shine of his eyes and the set of his jaw. "How much?" he asked, his voice low and even. Every eye turned to Hank. Hank, winded from his blow, stumbled back. He sneered, wiping spit from his lip. "You, a crippled rancher sitting alone out back, think this wild filly will boil beans before she bores you to death?" Bo did not blink. He reached into a worn leather pouch at his belt. The pouch opened with a crisp snap, and then a neat clink of silver coins rattled across the table, past whiskey boots and empty mugs, until they stopped at Hank's dirty hand. "I don't want someone easy to own," he said. "I want someone who's got fire." Time slowed. A man's laughter died halfway through a breath. For once, animosity held its tongue. Bo crouched down and cut the ropes that bound Tessa's wrists. He helped her to her feet, steadying her with a firm hand at her elbow. They stood, facing each other, in the center of the saloon. She didn't smile, she didn't look grateful, but her eyes glowed with something like recognition. An ember sparked in the ashes. He didn't ask her name, she didn't volunteer one. He simply ushered her through the crowd, past the tables of still murmuring men. No one spoke. Some scowled, others watched, uncertain. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Tessa raised her chin higher, the wind catching stray strands of her dark hair. She walked without looking back at the saloon's swinging doors, where laughter and curses had filled the walls scarcely a moment before. Behind her, beside her, Bo followed. He did not speak. He carried a lantern, its light steady in the dark, but his eyes were on her, the woman who would not bend. And though she would not say the words, something inside Tessa felt a shift, a realization that maybe this man too lived by his own rules, and would not ask her to silence hers. So she walked into the night beside a stranger who had seen her storm and offered something neither training nor ownership could provide. choice. The wagon creaked through the last bend of the dusty trail as dusk draped its silence over the plains. Tessa sat upright beside Bo, her arms crossed, her jaw clenched. Though free of rope, the weight of humiliation still clung to her like dust on her boots. She had not spoken a word since they left Red Hollow, nor had she asked where they were going. Bo's ranch stood at the edge of a shallow ridge, a modest spread of land lined with corral fencing and a weathered barn sagging at one end. His house was simple, 2 rooms and a loft, patched with care but bare of unnecessary comforts. He stopped the wagon, climbed down slowly with the help of his cane, and then turned to offer her a hand. She ignored it, jumped down herself, and followed him wordlessly toward the house. Inside, it smelled of cedar smoke and old leather. He showed her the loft by pointing. A wooden ladder led to a low-ceilinged space above the main room. "Bed's made, clean towel by the basin," he said gruffly. Then, without waiting for thanks, he turned and walked out, leaving her with nothing but the sound of the wind and her own breathing. That night, Tessa did not cry. She lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the rafters, listening to the horses shifting in the barn. She was used to strange roofs, cold floors, men with rough hands and cruel words. This one was different, too quiet, too clean, suspicious. At dawn, before the sun broke, she was up. She drew water from the pump, stoked the stove, and began sweeping the front porch. No one told her to. She just knew better than to leave things undone in someone else's house. By the time Bo opened the door, limping toward the barn, she had already started boiling water for coffee and was scrubbing a saddle near the fence. He paused, taking in the sight, then stepped over and dropped something on the porch rail, a pair of soft, worn leather gloves, small enough for her hands. "Do not act like you're hiding a crime," he said, not unkindly. "Work like you belong here." Tessa took the gloves. She said nothing, but something in her eyes shifted, a tiny crack in the walls she had built so carefully. That afternoon, as she chopped wood by the shed, she caught him watching her. Not judging, just watching. Her swing was practiced. She had done harder work, dirtier work. Chopping wood was almost a kindness. Bo returned to his chair by the fire, his cane leaning against the hearth. She brought him coffee. He looked up, surprised. "When?" he asked. She shrugged. "You paid for me." His jaw tightened. "I paid to get you away from McCord, not to own you." "Same thing to most folks." "Not to me." Silence filled the room again, but it was no longer the cold kind. That night, Tessa lay in the loft, listening again. Not for danger, just for him, the sound of Bo shifting below, the groan of the fire settling, the quiet hush of wind outside. She did not trust him, not yet, but she no longer feared him. And for a girl who had spent her life fighting for every inch of breath and space, that was a beginning. The wind swept steady over the ridge that framed the ranch, sending dry sagebrush whispering along the fence lines. Tessa rode the property each morning now, her hair tucked beneath Bo's old trail hat, her boots dusty, her frame straight in the saddle like she had been born on horseback. She moved with purpose, checking fence posts, tossing feed, her voice calm and low as she herded cattle into the lower field. Bo watched from the porch, cane across his lap, saying little but noticing everything. Late one afternoon, just as the sun began to dip behind the hill, Bo limped toward the barn with a bucket in one hand and a halter in the other. Tessa was brushing down one of the younger horses when she heard the thud, a sharp sound of flesh against earth. She turned. Bo lay awkwardly near the trough, cursing under his breath, his cane several feet away. She ran to him, already crouching. "Do not move," he grunted. "I am not going anywhere." Without waiting for permission, she slipped her arm behind his back, another around his waist. "Come on," she muttered, lifting. "You are heavier than you look." "I look heavy," he rasped, but let her help. It was slow going. Her chest pressed against his back as she half carried, half dragged him toward the house. Neither of them spoke, but both were acutely aware of how close they were, how the line between necessity and something else flickered. When they reached the steps, she shifted him to a sitting position too quickly. His leg struck the edge of the bench with a dull thump. He winced, gritted his teeth. "Sorry," she said, eyes flicking up, then quickly away. "Not broken," he replied, voice tight. "Just bruised pride." She turned and walked into the house, not waiting for more. Behind her, Bo watched the sway of her shoulders and the way the evening light caught in her hair. He chuckled to himself, a small, surprised sound. Cute, he thought. The word had never once come to mind about Tessa, until now. The next morning she found a note beside her plate. Tessa, feed bins low, check north fence. Her name, not girl, not you, just Tessa. She touched the paper once with her fingers before tucking it into her apron. That night, after the chores were done and the lantern glowed low, she sat across from Bo by the fire. He poured her a tin cup of coffee, neither of them speaking for a while. Then, quietly, as if measuring each word, she said, "My parents were killed when I was 8. I saw it happen. Bo looked at her, said nothing. "They were settlers," she continued, "too proud, too trusting. One night men came, said they wanted water. My father let them in." Her voice didn't crack. It was steady, hard-earned. "I watched from under the floorboards. They burned the house, took what they wanted. I was found days later by a stable hand from another ranch. Thought I was a boy at first. Didn't matter, they put me to work. Hard work. Blood work. The kind that makes you forget your own name." The fires snapped. She looked up. Her eyes were dry, fierce. "I stopped crying that year. Decided if no one was going to protect me, I would have to become the kind of girl no one could break." Bo's eyes met hers, deep, still, but not cold. He did not offer comfort. He did not pity her. Instead, he simply nodded. And for Tessa, that was more than enough. The last traces of winter clung to the northern hills, but the ground near the porch had begun to soften. A hush hung in the morning air, filled with the scent of thawed earth and wood smoke. Tessa knelt beneath the steps of the front porch, sleeves rolled up, fingers digging into the cold soil. She moved with a kind of quiet reverence, planting small roots and seeds with the care of someone rebuilding something invisible. Bo came around the corner with a bale of hay over one shoulder. He paused mid-step when he saw her. "You planting potatoes down there?" he asked, voice light with surprise. Tessa glanced up, her hair falling out of its tie, a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "Nope," she said, "just a few flowers. Forget-me-nots, lavender, daisies if they take." Bo raised a brow. "I figured you only grew things that filled a belly." Tessa smiled, small but real. "Flowers grow on stone if they get enough water. I do not need much. Just a patch of dirt that ain't trying to spit me out." Bo stood still, watching her. There was something in her voice, not bitterness, not hope exactly, something quiet and persistent, like the flowers themselves. "My mother," Tessa went on, brushing dirt from her palms, "she loved planting, said every flower is a letter from the earth. After she died and I got taken, I never had ground of my own again, never stayed long enough to grow anything." She pressed her hands against her knees and stood. "Until now, I guess." Bo said nothing. He gave a slow nod, then turned back toward the house. Later that evening, when Tessa came in from watering the rose, she found a small bundle wrapped in a linen napkin, placed in the center of the table. She opened it carefully. Inside was an old paper envelope, faded and yellowed with time. The writing had blurred, but the word seeds was still legible. She looked up as Bo walked in, setting his hat on the hook. "These yours?" she asked. "They were my mother's," he said simply. "She saved seeds every spring, said one day she would plant them when the house was right." Tessa's fingers curled around the fragile packet. "Why give them to me?" Bo looked at her, that still, unreadable gaze she had come to know. "Because maybe the house is finally right. Or maybe it just needed someone who knew what flowers were worth." She did not reply, only pressed the bundle gently against her chest. That night, neither of them spoke more of it. But something soft had settled between them, a warmth that was not from the fire, a kind of wordless promise. In a place where nothing had grown before, something had begun to bloom. The wind came up from the south that morning, carrying the smell of sagebrush and the sharp tang of dust. Bo was chopping wood near the barn when he spotted the figure riding up the main path, a man in a gray suit, too fine for the hills. His black boots polished, face clean-shaven beneath a bowler hat. The man dismounted like he owned the land and walked straight toward the porch, a satchel in hand. Bo wiped his brow, set down the axe, and limped toward the house. "You Bo Dillon?" the man called. Bo nodded, grip tightening on his cane. "Who's asking?" The man flashed a smile that never reached his eyes. "Thomas Whitfield. I'm with the First Land and Title Bank out of Cheyenne. Just here to verify some land holdings. Routine check." Tessa stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands with a cloth. She stayed silent, watching. Whitfield continued, pulling out a folded document. "Our records show some inconsistencies in your deed. Might just be clerical, but I'll need to see the original." Bo's jaw worked. He knew the land was his, inherited, passed from his father, but he had never been one for papers or reading fine print. "I'll get it," he said slowly, turning toward the house. Tessa's voice came quiet but clear. "May I see what he brought first?" Whitfield blinked. "It's just bank business, miss." "Yeah, zip." "I can read," she replied, "and I've seen more than a few of those forms." She stepped down from the porch, took the offered paper, and unfolded it. Her brow furrowed as her eyes scanned the words. Then she looked up. "You're not from First Land and Title. They don't use this letterhead anymore. Switched 3 years ago. And this clause, here, it's a forfeiture trigger. If Bo signs anything under this, he loses his land within 60 days, unless he repays a loan he never took." Whitfield's face stiffened. "Now look here." "No," she interrupted, folding the paper calmly. "You look. I've seen your type. You float from one struggling ranch to the next, find folks who cannot read, and trick them into giving up everything. Not today." She handed the paper back, firm and steady. "You can ride on, and I'd suggest you do it fast." Whitfield glared between them, then gathered his satchel with a scoff. "Fine, but when this place folds, and it will, do not say no one tried to help." He turned on his heel and rode off, kicking up dust behind him. Bo watched him go, then looked at Tessa. "How did you know all that?" "I used to work at a ranch that lost everything because of men like him," she said softly. "I was just a girl, but I never forgot the words they used." Bo nodded slowly. "You're sharper than most men in suits I've met." Tessa shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Funny, folks used to say I was too wild to teach, too mouthy to learn." He looked at her a long moment, something deep flickering behind his eyes. Then, quiet as the breeze, "Then they were fools." For a moment, neither spoke. The sky stretched wide above them, the wind curling around the porch like a whispered promise. Inside the house, the kettle began to whistle. Tessa turned to go, her steps easy. She did not need thanks. She had not done it for that. But Bo followed her in, and for the first time, poured 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. The lantern flickered low in the cabin kitchen, casting golden hues across the worn wooden table where 2 figures sat in the hush of evening. Outside, the Wyoming wind sighed through the grass and rattled the old shutters, but inside it was warm not just from the stove, but from the presence of 2 people who had slowly begun to lean toward something more than convenience. Tessa sat upright, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, face furrowed in concentration as she balanced the ranch ledger. Her hand moved steadily over the page, writing down feed costs, repairs, and purchases with surprising precision. A pencil was tucked behind her ear, and her hair, usually untamed, was tied back in a loose braid. Bo Dillon sat across from her, his long fingers tracing symbols burned into a leather-bound branding guide. His voice, low and steady, broke the quiet. "This one here," he said, pointing, "is Bar T. Belonged to a ranch south of Casper. Gone now." Tessa leaned in, examining the mark. "Looks like a hammer and nail." He grunted. "A brand's a story. Every one of these got a past, some good, some full of ghosts." She glanced up. "And what's yours say?" He held her gaze a moment too long, then looked back down. "Mine says Dillon, built by my father's hands, burned by mine, rebuilt slow." She didn't press further. Instead, she turned a page in the ledger. "You're 6 sacks short of grain for next month. You'll need to reorder." He looked at her, faintly amused. "You sound like a banker." "Maybe in another life," she murmured. "One where I had shoes that matched and someone read me bedtime stories." Beau's expression shifted, softened. "You're sharp with numbers." "Not something most folks ever appreciated," she said, dryly. "I once told a man his cattle count was wrong. He called me uppity and threw me out without pay. Then he was a fool." She blinked, surprised by the bluntness. Beau leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I've had more help from you in 2 months than from 3 hired hands last year. You fix fences, break horses, and keep this place from falling apart. And you do it without ever asking what's in it for you." She looked down, her fingers stilling over the ledger. "I never ask, because I never expect anything to last. I always thought if I learned enough, worked hard enough, someone might finally let me stay. But they never did. They always said I was too loud, too wild, too much." Beau's eyes locked on hers, serious and steady. "You're not too much. You're just more than they could handle." A silence stretched between them, not awkward but weighty with meaning. Then he spoke again, quieter this time. "Maybe people like you aren't meant to be kept. Maybe they're meant to be chosen." She looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "Chosen?" He nodded once. "By someone who sees all of you, not just the pieces they want." Her voice caught a little when she asked, "Is that what you see?" He held her gaze. "I see someone who was born for more than what the world gave her." A blush rose to her cheeks and she looked away, unsure what to say. After a beat, he added, with a small, tentative smile, "Do you mind if I call you Tess?" She turned back to him. "Tess? It's shorter," he said, shrugging slightly. "Softer, maybe. And I figured you deserved something gentle for once." She laughed softly, a surprised, quiet sound. "No one's ever shortened my name before. Usually they just shout it." "Well," he said, smiling, "I ain't shoutin'." She paused, searching his face, then nodded. "All right, Ted." He tapped the ledger lightly. "You missed a number on that last row." She rolled her eyes and leaned back over the book, the blush still faint on her cheeks. "I did not." "You did," he said, still grinning. They sat like that a while longer, the fire crackling, the prairie wind moaning in the distance. Two people who had never been taught how to belong, slowly beginning to find a way. And as she corrected the line in the ledger, Beau sat quietly, watching her, thinking that sometimes the strongest people were the ones who had learned to walk through the fire and still found the strength to grow wildflowers from the ashes. The morning was gray, the kind of quiet that sits heavy before a storm. Dew clung to the grass like tiny pearls, and the breeze was soft but restless. Tessa walked slowly across the pasture, a satchel slung over her shoulder, boots damp from the morning mist. Behind her, the ranch lay still, chimney smoking faintly, windmill creaking in the distance. She had left a note on the kitchen table, folded neatly beside Beau's coffee mug. 4 words, written in her small, straight script. "Thank you for letting me survive." No tear stains, no goodbyes, just the sort of message left by someone who never expected more than a warm place and time to catch her breath. Tessa did not cry as she walked. Her eyes were dry, her breath even, but each step felt heavier than the last. Because even though she told herself it was time to go, that she had earned her keep and nothing more, her heart had begun to root itself in the dirt she once thought too hard to call home. She reached a shallow creek at the base of the ridge, water glinting like glass over the stones. She sat on a flat rock, unslung her satchel, and stared down into the moving current. No sound but birdsong and her own heartbeat. Then, hooves. She heard them before she saw him. Beau's horse slowed on the ridge above. His silhouette against the pale sky was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, one knee still stiff in the saddle. He dismounted slowly, wincing slightly as his boot hit the ground. For a long second, he just stood there. Then he walked down to her. Tessa stayed seated, arms folded over her knees, not turning. When he was close enough to see the crease between her brows, he said softly, "You left before breakfast." She didn't answer. He looked around, at the satchel, the empty space beside her, the raw silence hanging in the air. Then he asked, "You think I hired you to muck stalls?" That made her look up. "I don't think anyone hires someone like me for anything else," she replied. "I was trouble when I came, a burden when I stayed. I just thought, maybe it was time to stop pretending." Pretending what? This was ever meant to last. Her voice cracked a little, and she bit her lip. Bo stepped closer. From his coat pocket he pulled a faded cloth, worn but still folded neatly. He held it out. Tessa blinked. "What's that?" "You left it behind the first day," he said. "Found it under the stairs. Coulda tossed it, but I kept it." "Why?" "Because I figured someday," he said, voice low, steady, "I'd need something to remind you that you belonged here." She stared at the cloth. It was her mother's handkerchief, stitched with tiny blue flowers. Something she had carried through every place, every beating, every hard morning. Something, she thought, lost. Her lips trembled. "You kept it all this time?" He nodded once. "Because from the moment you walked in and stood your ground in that busted barn, I knew you weren't just passing through. You were the kind of woman you build a home around, if you're lucky enough to deserve it." She shook her head, breath catching. "I'm not someone men keep." "No," he said gently. "You're someone men follow, if they've got the spine to." Tessa stood slowly. The creek whispered beside them, wind brushing her cheek like a question. Bo extended his hand. He didn't promise anything. He didn't beg. He just offered, calm and steady, like he did with wild colts, with broken tools, with every hard thing that ever needed patience. Tessa looked down at his calloused fingers, then up into his face. And slowly, wordlessly, she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were rough, so were his, but together they fit. He squeezed once, not to hold, not to trap, just to say he was here. She did not cry. Not yet. But in that moment, by the creek and the rocks and the sky turning gold above them, she knew. She was no longer just surviving. She was starting to live. Summer rolled in with golden dust and humming bees, and Wildflower Ridge bloomed in full. The ranch was no longer a quiet, half-forgotten place tucked against the hills. It pulsed with life. Cattle grazed lazily across wide pastures, fences stood tall and tight, and the garden behind the cabin overflowed with color. Lavender, forget-me-nots, and daisies swayed in the heat, their fragrance drifting on the wind. Tessa rode the fence line each morning, her hat pulled low and braids swinging behind her. She barked commands, patched brakes, pulled calves from thorny traps, and by noon returned with dust on her boots and a spark in her eye. The boys in town started calling her Miss Tess Who Rides Like Thunder, though not one of them could keep up with her in the saddle. He was no longer just helping Bo, she was running the ranch with him. They never made announcements, never needed to. But the way she walked beside him at the general store, hand brushing his, the way he passed her tools without asking, the way she handed him coffee every sunrise, with the quiet smile of someone who had made peace with herself, it was all clear as glass. On one warm evening, with crickets chirping and the sun hanging low like a coin in the west, Bo saddled his horse and whistled for her. She met him outside the barn, curious. "You planning on running off?" "Only if you're coming too." She arched a brow. "Where we headed?" "You'll see." They rode side by side, hooves kicking up soft clouds of dirt. The trail wound past the southern field, over the small ridge where wildflowers bloomed thickest in spring. It had been Tessa's idea to scatter seed there. The soil was rocky, the hill half-barren, but she said it deserved something beautiful. Now, in the golden light of dusk, that hill was ablaze with color. Bull dismounted and tied his horse. She followed suit. Together they climbed the last slope on foot, boots crushing wild petals. At the top they stood in silence. The flowers brushed their knees. Wind moved through them like a hymn. In the distance, the ranch lay quiet and golden, safe under their shared care. Bo cleared his throat. You said something once, about how flowers can grow on rock. Tessa turned, curious. I did. He looked at her, steady and calm. Got me thinking, if flowers can grow on stone, maybe love can too. She didn't speak, just watched him, every wall inside her trembling but not falling. Bo took a slow breath. Where does it grow, Tess? Love, I mean. She blinked, then smiled softly. A smile full of everything she had been and everything she had become. In people, she said, who ain't afraid of where they came from, even when it hurt. His eyes dropped for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled a piece of leather, worn, curved with age. It was the old horse rein he had carried since boyhood, the first one he'd ever carved. And in the center, a single letter burned into it. T. I ain't got a ring, he said. Never figured I'd need one. He stepped closer and held it out. But this has followed me longer than any man or woman. Through war, through storms, it's the only thing I ever trusted to hold steady. Tessa stared at the strip of leather. Her throat tightened. I want it to follow you now, Bo said. If you'll let it. She didn't answer right away, just reached out, her calloused, sun-browned fingers brushing his. She took the leather, looped it gently around her wrist, then met his eyes. You didn't try to tame me, she whispered. No, he said. You're not a thing to be tamed. You just stood beside me. He nodded. That's the only way I want it, he said. Beside you. Always. They stood like that, long after the sun dipped behind the ridge. No vows, no preacher. Just flowers, wind, and two souls who had stopped running. From that day forward, folks didn't call it Dillon Ranch anymore. They called it Wildflower Ridge. Not just for the blooms, but for the woman who made them grow. Tessa rode beside Bo every day after, through storm, through sun, through every broken fence and every birth in the barn. And when strangers came and asked who ran the place, the townsfolk would say, She does. The girl no man could keep. But someone did? No, they'd reply, smiling. Someone chose her, and she chose him back. If that story touched your heart, if you felt the dust in the wind, the fire in her eyes, and the quiet strength of a man who chose not to tame, but to stand beside, then you're in the right place. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales of love that rise from the hardest ground. Stories where hearts heal, where strong women and silent men find something worth holding on to, and where even the wildest souls find home. So if you believe in that kind of love, the kind you fight for, the kind you ride beside, hit that subscribe button, like, and share this story with someone who still believes in real, raw romance. And remember, out here in the West, love was never tame. Subscribe now to never miss a heartbeat from Wild West Love Stories.